Welcome to Cerebral Faith Live. Today we're going to be talking about Genesis 4, what history's first murder can teach us, or the first murder report. And this is part 4 in a series of live streams that I've been doing on what scholars call the primeval history period. The primeval history is Genesis 1 all the way up to Genesis 11. Genesis 1 to 11. And so the first week, I exegeted through Genesis 1. I argued that it's about functional origins, not material origins, and it's about God inaugurating the universe as its cosmic temple. And in Genesis 2, the second episode, I talked about Genesis 2, and then I talked about Genesis 3, and there was a whole lot of good, juicy, ancient Near Eastern Hebrew stuff there. We saw that you don't have to reject evolutionary biology in order to have a high view of the creation accounts in Genesis 1 and 2. And I'm not going to summarize it all here. But in case you didn't know, live streams, and then this is not just the case with Cerebral Faith, this is the case with all live streams, everywhere on YouTube. After they are done streaming live, you can go back and watch them later on playback. And so if you were not able to attend the Genesis 1 presentation, the Genesis 2 presentation, or the Genesis 3 presentation, it's all here on YouTube. You can go watch it. You can go back and watch it later whenever you get the chance. And they're all up on the Cerebral Faith website also. It's www.cerebralfaith.net, where you can find all my blogs, all my blog posts, my podcast episodes, and my videos. My videos are embedded there, and they are categorized. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. And turn on notifications so that you know when I'm going to have more of these live streams. So in order to make sure that I don't go overboard, I'm going to start my timer, and we are going to get into it. And if you have any questions throughout the course of the presentation, leave them in the live stream. I'll leave them in the live chat. And here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. So Genesis 4, what history's first murder can teach us. Well, first we want to ask a couple of literary questions. One is, why is this short story included? And I have two answers to that. Well, the first is just simply that readers would naturally want to know what happened to Adam and Eve after they were banished. You know, we read Genesis 2 about how Adam and Eve were formed, and how they had a relationship in the Garden of Eden. We read Genesis 3, the story of them being cast out of the garden, and they were going to die, and we read all of the bad stuff that was going to happen to them because they're living in a fallen world now. And readers would naturally want to know, hey, what became of these guys? What became of them? And so Genesis 4, the author doesn't spend a whole lot of time, because like I said, in Genesis 2's live stream, and as I'm going to say later near the end of the series, Genesis 1 to 11 is a prologue to the calling of, it's set up to the call of Abraham. So he doesn't spend too much time on it, but he does spend a chapter on what happened to Adam and Eve, immediately, or somewhat immediately after the fall. And, they had children, and their children became farmers, and yeah. Second reason is that it's part of the build-up to the flood narrative. Scholars and theologians all across the board have recognized that Genesis 4, we have the fall in Genesis 3, then we have this murder, spoiler alert, occurring in Genesis 4. Yeah, spoiler alert, like the whole thumbnail wasn't a spoiler. Everybody knows story of Cain and Abel. We have Genesis 3, we have the fall, we have Genesis 4, which is the, this murder, and then we have Genesis 5 that mentions things like, Lamech avenging himself 70 times over or something. And it just gets worse over those 3 chapters. And then when you get to Genesis 6, their thoughts were only evil all the time, the text says, and and we've got the Nephilim thing going on, and God's like, enough, I'm going to flood the world. I'm going to hit the reset button. So those are the 2 reasons. The first reason is readers would naturally want to, they just want to know what happened to Adam and Eve. The second part is that the author wants to, he wants to show that buildup to, he wants to show how humanity just got worse and worse and worse. So let's read the chapter together. Genesis 4, New International Version. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, no, he did not say oops. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad the father of Mahujael, and Mahujael was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. Lamech married 2 women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, "Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord." So that's the chapter read in its entirety. I want to jump into my first topic, that things we can glean from this account. And that is the This account very prominently shows the danger of letting sin grow within you. Sin, people don't, it's like the Casting Crowns song. People don't crumble in a day. People don't become, monsters overnight. They're not just upstanding individuals one day and then all of a sudden they realize to go commit some heinous crime. Um, you know, it's a slow fade when you give yourself away. It's a slow fade when black and white turn to gray, like the Casting Crown song says. James chapter 1 verses 13 to 15 says, quote, "When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death." As Yoda said in the Star Wars movie, "Fear is the path that leads to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." Anakin Skywalker did not become Darth Vader overnight. It took him the course of 3 movies to go from this sweet little boy who wanted to be a Jedi to being Darth Vader, who killed a whole room full of Jedi younglings. I mean, he didn't just up and decide to become Darth Vader and to join Palpatine and bring ruin to the Republic. It took time. It took time of not resisting temptations, of letting deception get to him, like Palpatine's deception and the lust for power, not suppressing that, and it didn't go well for him. Evil is always born in the heart before it manifests itself as an external action. Jesus knew this well. This is why in Matthew chapter 15, verse 19, he says, quote, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander," end quote. It always starts in here before it comes out here. So this is why when you read the New Testament, I had a podcast episode on this a good while back. I think it was episode 87. Does God punish thought crimes? I don't. Let me check on that. I can't remember what podcast, what number it was. I don't keep track of the numbering very well. But it was. I dealt with it. I talked about this. Why you have so many commands of God from Jesus, who is God, to say, don't even let yourself be angry with your brother. Don't look at a woman with lust. Don't, even in the Old Testament, you have God saying not to covet. Well, coveting is something you do on the inside. It's not something it's not really an action. So why does God, I can't find the episode. I'm sure if you looked for it, you'd be able to find it. But yeah, it begins in the heart. Out of the heart come evil thoughts. It always begins inside before it turns into murder, adultery, sexual immorality. You never have the action before you have the thought. So that's why you have Jesus saying, "Don't look at a woman with lust. Don't even be angry with your brother." Jesus, why are you so focused on what we think about and how we feel? And well, because if you cut it off at the root, if you cut sin off where it begins, which is in the heart, then you don't have to worry about evil feelings and evil inclinations, then you don't have to worry about evil actions. That'll just, those won't come about by default. As Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So, looks like I got ahead of myself. I put it. So this is why this explains why Jesus commanded not to commit adultery in the heart, Matthew 5:28. The point wasn't that lust is as evil as adultery. I know some preachers say that, some lay people say that. I used to think that. I used to think, he's saying lust. If you've looked at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery in your heart, so they're on the same level of immorality. No, it's saying, hey, if you have the heart of an adulterer, then you are way more likely to become an adulterer. You've committed adultery in the heart. And because you've committed adultery in the heart, it's going to be a lot easier for you to commit adultery in the bedroom. But hey, if you're not an adulterer at heart, if you don't even lust, you don't have to worry about cheating on your wife. You don't have to worry about having sex before marriage. You don't have to worry about, falling into, any kind of sexual sin. If you don't lust, get rid of lust, and any external sin that takes place in space and time, those won't come about. You guard your heart, so relevant to our discussion of Cain and Abel is what Jesus had to say about anger. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 to 22, Jesus said, quote, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fires of hell," end quote. So, Jesus said, if he's not here saying you can't ever get angry, because if that were and feeling anger is a sin, because if that were the case, Jesus himself would be a sinner. Anybody remember John 2 when Jesus went into the temple and flipped over the tables because people were, buying and selling and turning his father's house into a den of thieves? Yeah, Jesus got angry at times. Matthew 23, when I read Matthew 23, I imagine boots on the ground. I imagine Jesus was screaming that. "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you avoid being condemned to hell?" Because it's just so harsh. I can't imagine Jesus saying, "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you avoid being condemned to hell?" I don't imagine him saying it like that. What he's talking about here is unrighteous anger. It's disproportionate anger. It's the kind of anger that would lead you, it's not restrained anger. It's the kind of anger that would lead you to entertain, well, in the context, we see murderous thoughts. And this is the kind of anger he says, hey, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And in my podcast episode, which I can't remember the number of, but I know the title, it's called, Does God Punish Thought Crimes? I said that, well, he's not saying anybody who gets angry will go to hell, or even but that they're in danger of judgment. They're in danger of being subject to judgment. Well, why? Well, because they might murder. And what does John, I think it's 1 John 3:15 say? Anyone who hates his brother is a murderer at heart, and we know that no murderer has eternal life in him. So you'll be in danger. Just as if you play in the street, you'll be in danger of being hit by a car. It doesn't mean you will get hit by a car, but it means you'll be in danger of being hit by a car. And the same goes for those who say, "You fool." Now here I don't think he's talking about just simply insulting someone or acknowledging someone's real stupidity. Because if that were the case, the author of the book of Proverbs is guilty of sin multiple times. Because he calls no specific individual, but he calls um, groups of people fools, like, people who are short tempered or people who squander their money or whatever. They will be in danger of the fire of hell. And I don't know this. There's no way to prove this, but I have a suspicion that Jesus probably had the Cain and Abel incident in the back of his mind when he was giving this discourse, because it just fits so perfectly about hatred and resentment and murder and anger. So okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the sacrifice. Why did God accept Abel's sacrifice but not Cain? Why did God not accept Cain's sacrifice? Well, the reason is simple. He wasn't able. Please don't leave. I put some puns in the live chat, and yeah, this live stream is going to rock. Hope that pun didn't kill you. Yeah, please don't go. I won't do it. I won't do it anymore. I broke my promise. I'm sorry, but this time for real, I won't do it anymore. Okay, but jokes aside, what is the reason? Well, on page 38 of the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, John Walton writes, quote, "Fat portions, 4:4. Mention of the fat portions would contrast in the audience's mind to whole burnt offerings, in which the whole animal is consumed. The description of Abel's offering also contrasts with a blood offering. Usually, if blood were offered, it was to deal with some offense, and the whole animal was to be offered, not just the fat parts. Blood rites were not common in the ancient world and do not appear in the Bible until the period of the Exodus and Sinai. The fat parts, the suet, were inedible and would typically be offered as a gift before the meal was eaten in a ritual meal. Offering of the suet is not attested in Mesopotamia, but Milgram finds it among the Hittite, Canaanite, and Phoenicians," end quote. So Abel was not offering a sacrifice to atone for any sin, Walton notes, but to please Yahweh. This was not a sin offering. Was the reason that God rejected Cain's sacrifice because he burnt fruit instead of animals? Walton doesn't think so. Walton writes, quote, "There is intrinsically no problem for Cain to bring produce as a gift to God. The word used for his sacrifice, minha, is one that describes the kind of offering outlined in Leviticus 2, which is regularly something other than animal sacrifice. It was likewise common throughout the ancient world to offer food off of what was grown." I submit to you that God rejected Cain's sacrifice not because it was fruit instead of animals or anything about the sacrifice itself, but rather because Cain's heart wasn't right. In Psalm chapter 51, verses 16 to 17, we read, quote, "You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise," end quote. And in Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24, we read, quote, I despise your feasts. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps I will not listen. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, end quote. So in Amos is it's dealing with the exilic period, the whole Babylonian exile. I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think it takes place after the exile, and Amos is a post-exilic prophet, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but it definitely has to deal with uh, the exile, whether regardless of when Amos was preaching, and so the Israelites had fallen into idolatry and all kinds of sin. They at one point they were doing they were sacrificing their children to Molech, like the Canaanites did before them. I mean, that's not just idolatry; that's idolatry and murder, infanticide. And you read the major prophets, and God has got a lot of nasty things to say about Israel. They had just fallen into gross depravity, and yet we see here that they were still going on with all of their religious rituals to Yahweh. And Yahweh says, I hate this. I despise your feasts. I don't take any delight in your solemn assemblies. He hates them. Why? Because their hearts are not right. They do not have believing loyalty to Yahweh. They are worshiping other gods. They're murdering their children. It's just not good. So, I guess I forgot to put a transition on that slide. God knew Cain was harboring resentment in his heart. We're not given the details, but this resentment towards Abel could have been growing. I believe that Cain and Abel may have had some tension that led up to that point. We're not told, but it is a reasonable inference. It's, to think that Cain would just, Cain and Abel would just get, they were buddy. They were best friends. They were bros. And then all of a sudden, because God accepted Abel's offering and not his, he's like, okay, Abel, you got to die. This was probably just the straw that broke the camel's back. It was probably building up to that, and this was just the last straw. And God, it's the breaking point, and God knew this. God says, he says, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to rule over you, but you must rule over it instead. Now, in the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, I read something really interesting about this sin that crouches at the door of Cain's heart. John Walton writes, quote, "Sin is crouching at your door," chapter 4, verse 7. Recent commentators have preferred repointing the participle crouching, heb robes, to rabis, and seeing it as a reference to a well-known Mesopotamian demon, Rabisu. Rabisu lingers around doorways. Sin is then portrayed as a doorway demon waiting for its victim to cross the threshold. From the Old Babylonian on in Mesopotamia, such demons were considered evil and thought to ambush their victims, end quote. So it's no secret that Satan and other demons can act on its sinful desires already present. We see this multiple times throughout Scripture, such as in the case of Satan tempting Jesus to break his period of fasting in Matthew 4, even though the thought most likely occurred to him, since he hadn't eaten in 4 days. Demons can either start fires or pour fuel on one's already burning. Cain could have been tempted by an evil spirit named Reseb, who acted on Cain's already present resentment. Topic 2, the mercy of God towards Cain. According to the Bible, the sentence for a murderer is death. We see this in Genesis 9:6 and Exodus 21:12. And yet, God does not strike Cain down. He simply banishes him to the east. Moreover, not only does God let Cain live, he goes the extra mile to prevent anyone else from striking him down. Cain told God that whoever found him would kill him. So God put a mark on Cain and said that anyone who killed him would suffer vengeance 7 times over. That's in verse 15. So I want to point this out because so often the God of the Old Testament is depicted as just this monster who is just so easily angered. He's just this horrible person. Um, but the God of the New Testament, oh, he's sweet and he's loving, he's kind. But look at this. God shows mercy on a murderer, someone who committed a capital crime. God could have struck him down with lightning or caused him to have a heart attack. But instead of zapping him and striking him down, God says, I will, I won't kill you. I'm just going to banish you. And he goes the extra mile. When Cain says, anyone who finds me murders me, he puts a mark on Cain. And we're going to get to that later about what the mark is and what the mark is not. But that looks like the God who showed mercy on the adulterous woman in John 8. Now I know John 8 probably most likely not authentic, most likely not in the original chapter of John. But yeah, that's the story of the adulterous woman that moves us when we read it. We've got something like that in Genesis 4. And by the way, adultery was also a capital crime. And both parties, both the man and the woman, would be punished for it, not just the woman. And that was not necessarily the case in other places in the ancient Near East. That's one of the ways that the Bible differs, that Israel differs from her neighbors. So next topic is Cain had libertarian free will. The philosopher Dr. Tim Stratton of Free Thinking Ministries defines libertarian free will this way. Libertarian free will is the ability to choose between a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with one's own nature. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 6 to 7, we read, God says to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." God's exhortation presupposes the principle of alternative possibilities. The principle of alternative possibilities, sometimes abbreviated PAP, PAP, means that you have the ability to choose between alternative possibilities, as the name suggests. Now, I am going to argue that if the Calvinists are right, or at least most Calvinists, I know the ones that affirm exhaustive divine determinism, there are some outliers like Greg Kokel of Stand to Reason who affirm the tulip, but they believe man has libertarian free will in every other area of life. But most Calvinists affirm what is called exhaustive divine determinism. This is the view that God causally determines all things that come to pass. Every word, thought, and deed of every human being who ever has lived and ever will live. Every single molecule that vibrates in the universe is done by his will. It is exhaustive divine determinism. And what I'm arguing here is Genesis 4, 6 to 7 would make no sense if this view of God's sovereignty were right. Because God, by the way, I'm not attacking a straw man when I just characterized what divine determinists believe. John Calvin in his Institutes says, God arranges all things by his sovereign counsel in such a way that individuals are born who are doomed from the womb to certain death and to glorify him by their destruction, quote and end quote. And he also said, Quote, God not only foresaw that Adam would fall, but also ordained that he should. I confess it is a horrible decree, yet no one can deny but God foreknew Adam's fall, and therefore foreknew it because he had ordained it so by his own decree. Mark Talbot, in Suffering and the Sovereignty of God, pages 41 to 42, says, quote, God brings about all things in accordance with his will. It isn't merely that God manages to turn the evil aspects of our world to good for those that love him. It is rather that he himself brings about these evil aspects. This includes God's having brought about the Nazis' brutality at Birkenau and Auschwitz, as well as the terrible killings of Dennis Rader and even the sexual abuse of a young child, end quote. Just horrible. And by the way, I plan on having some live streams criticizing Calvinism soteriologically and making a case for my view, Molinism. But with regards to Genesis 4, with regards to God's admonition to Cain, if God causally determines all things, then that means he causally determined Cain's actions. If he causally determined Cain's actions, God's warning was superfluous, not to mention insincere. Hey, sin's crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you need to rule over it instead. But I'm not going to causally determine you to rule over it. I'm going to causally determine you to give in to your sins. I'm going to warn you. It's like a puppet show. What is the point of warning Cain? He can't do otherwise because God is controlling the string. He's pulling the strings like a puppet master. There's no point. The warning is superfluous and insincere. And even worse is that it means God punishes Cain for actions he caused Cain to do. How can that be just, Mr. Calvinist? Oh, I don't know. Who are you, old man, to question God? I don't know. My mystery. I don't know about you, but the God I serve doesn't toy with people like that. As 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, quote, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can endure it, end quote. Here in this passage, the Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthian church, says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to man. God is faithful. He won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can endure it. So when you are tempted, you have two choices. Choice number one, you have A, given to temptation and sin, or non-A, take the way of escape that God provides. You have sin and the way of escape. Whichever one you choose, you do not have to. You're responsible. It's your own fault if you give in to sin, or if you take the way of escape. But if exhaustive divine determinism is true, there is no way of escape. The way of escape is an illusion. If you are going to fall into sin, God's decreed that. He's pulling the strings. There's no way for you to avoid your fate. And yet that's not what Scripture says. Scripture says you can avoid temptation. You can, because God will provide a way out. You don't have to give in. But that's not possible if exhaustive divine determinism is true. But we have it right here in the biblical text. So we have to reject exhaustive divine determinism. Let's move on to the next topic, the mark of Cain. Genesis 4:15 says, quote, and the Lord said unto him, therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him, end quote. Now, what is this mark? What is the mark of Cain? Well, there are at least three possibilities that I've come across. One is a tattoo or some other physical mark. Another possibility is like a guardian angel that was set over him to keep him safe. And the third is, and this one is really bad, and I'm going to argue against this. I'm just going to make this clear right now. I'm going to argue against this third one. This third one is racist. It's very bad. And I don't even know where this idea came from, to be honest. There's nothing in the biblical text that would make you think that dark skin is what the mark of Cain is. No. No, that's not it. Well, with regards to that third option, and I'm going to refute that one out of the way right now, because it's just so awful. It's just another example of how people have abused the biblical text, and people have suffered because of it, because of poor hermeneutics. GotQuestions.org says, quote, "In the past, many believed the mark of Cain to be dark skin, that God changed the color of Cain's skin to be black in order to identify him. Since Cain also received a curse, the belief that the mark was black skin caused many to believe that people of dark skin were cursed. Many used the mark of Cain teaching as a justification for the African slave trade and discrimination against people with black/dark skin. This interpretation of the mark of Cain is completely unbiblical. Nowhere in the Hebrew scriptures does Oath used to refer to skin color. The curse on Cain in Genesis chapter 4 was on Cain himself. Nothing is said of Cain's curse being passed on to his descendants, end quote. So in other words, this racist idea is being read into the biblical text. It's not being drawn from the biblical text. That's eisegesis. Ideas have consequences. Good ideas have good consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences. This is a bad idea. Okay, well, it's not a mark. It's not. It's not black skin. So what is it? What about a tattoo or some other mark? Eliot's Commentary for English Readers says, "The Lord said to him, therefore." Most of the versions have "not so," which requires only a slight and probable change of the Hebrew text. Sevenfold. Cain's punishment was severe because his crime was the result of bad and violent passions, but his life was not taken because the act was not premeditated. Murder was more than he had meant, but as anyone killing him would mean murder, therefore the vengeance would be sevenfold, that is, complete, 7 being the number of perfection. Others, however, consider that Cain's life was under a religious safeguard, 7 being the sacred number of creation. In this we have the germ of the merciful law, which set cities of refuge apart for the involuntary manslayer. The Lord set a mark upon Cain. This rendering suggests an utterly false idea. Cain was not branded nor marked in any way. What the Hebrew says is, "And Jehovah set," that is, appointed, "unto Cain a sign, that no one finding him should slay him." In a similar manner, God appointed the rainbow as a sign unto Noah, that mankind should never again be destroyed by a flood. Probably the sign there was also some natural phenomenon, the regular occurrence of which would assure Cain of his security, and so pacified his excited feelings. So what he's saying here is that the Hebrew word oath is broad. It can be used to refer to a sign. It doesn't have to mean a mark in the sense of like a brand. Like you take a stick, you put it in the fire, and then you stick a cow's butt with it to let other know, hey, this is my cattle. That he's saying it doesn't, doesn't have to mean that. He's saying Ellicott is saying that's a false idea. It just means sign. And it's used of the rainbow. It's a sign of the Noahic covenant. However, I don't think it has to refer to a natural phenomenon either, because as you see at the bottom of the screen there, Genesis 17:11 uses oath to refer to circumcision. There's another problem with the tattoo/branding option. And that is, what kind of physical mark would alert people, hey, don't kill me, I'm under God's protection. If you kill me, you'll be sorry. What kind of tattoo would alert people in that way? So that just doesn't make any sense. Now, this last one is very speculative, but I had a hunch, and I looked all over the place in the Bible, in lexicon. I did a word study of oath to figure out whether or not this could have some legitimacy. I didn't find anything that would rule it out, but I didn't find anything that would confirm it either. I didn't find any uses of it, and that is the whole guardian angel option. Was there some kind of supernatural, kind of like the cherub that was set in front of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3:22? Could this be some kind of protector, a bodyguard of the heavenly host? Now, the closest I could find was Genesis 3:12. And the context indicates that it's the angel of the Lord who is the sign. Oh, it didn't share this part of the screen. I'm going on 48 minutes. I don't think I'm going to read Exodus 3, but I'm going to leave I'm going to put this slide in a PDF format. I'm going to put it in a pinned comment on this video after the live stream is over, and you'll be able to download this, and you don't even have to, you don't have to download this to click to the chapter. It takes you to Bible Gateway and Exodus 3, but yeah, I'm not going to read it because I'm going on 48 minutes, and I want to stay within the time slot. I got my clock here says I've got 14 minutes left. Exodus chapter 4 verses 8 to 9, and Exodus chapter 4 verse 28, Exodus chapter 4 verse 30, Exodus chapter 7 verse 3. It's used of the plagues that are sent upon the Egyptians. The term oath. Exodus chapter 12 verse 13, it's referring to the blood of the lamb on the Israelites' doorpost. The blood was a sign to the destroyer. Hey, there are Israelites in here. Don't come in here. Don't kill the firstborn in here. This is an Israelite home. 2 Kings chapter 20 verses 8 to 9 uses it as Hezekiah's moving shadow. Hezekiah's moving shadow was assigned to Hezekiah. He prayed. He was going to die. Isaiah told him, and Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, and then Isaiah came back and said, hey, the Lord heard your prayer. You're not going to die. You're going to live 15 more years. And he gave Hezekiah's shadow moved back in the opposite direction. When the sun sets, the shadow moves a certain way. Well, it moved in the way it wasn't supposed to. It was a supernatural, miraculous kind of moving. And that showed that was proof, because that can't naturally happen. That was a miraculous sign to Hezekiah that God heard him and was going to answer his prayer. In my word study, I have found that most usages of oath in the Old Testament refer to broadly things in these three categories: miracles, divinely appointed natural events, and circumcision. I never find it used of angelic beings. The closest is the angel of the Lord in Exodus 3, and as you'll see in a future live stream when I get to talking about the deity of Christ and the Trinity and all that, that's no ordinary angel. Or if you're familiar with Michael Heiser's stuff, you probably already know what I'm alluding to. So what is the oath of Cain? Usage and definition doesn't rule out an angelic bodyguard, but there's no instance that would support it either. The conclusion that I've come to is that it's likely some kind of supernatural thing, an act of God or divinely appointed natural event that would somehow, in some way, alert people to not kill Cain. So let's say somebody tried to kill Cain. Let's say that Cain walks into a tavern or something, and people turn around and they go, "Hey, there's Cain. There's that murderer. Let's get him." And so somebody grabs their knife and they run up to him and they're going to jab him in the heart, and then they drop dead. Just all of a sudden. And then maybe another guy runs up and he tries to stab him in the heart and he also drops dead. And so, it's kind of like Ananias and Sapphira, and Cain, and maybe some of the other people in the tavern ask, "Wait, what's going on?" And Cain explains how God, is protecting him. And so that's the sign. The sign is, hey, anybody who messes with this guy is gonna meet an untimely end. And so maybe the word gets around, and then people don't try to kill him because they know what's going to happen to him. Now that is pure speculate. That whole scenario just came out of my mind. But I can imagine something like that. Truth is, we don't know what the mark, what the sign is, the sign of Cain. But whatever it was, we know that it would get people's attention. Anybody who had murderous intent toward Cain, somehow it would alert them that Cain is not to be trifled with. He's not, God will strike you down. He will hurt you if you try to take vigilante justice. Okay, Q&A time. Oh my gosh, I actually stayed within the time limit. I still got 10 minutes left on my phone here. This is awesome. Okay. So, we've got an extra 10 minutes for we've got an extra 10 minutes for Q&A because I not only did not go overtime, but I got done early. Yes, flee from idolatry. Maybe the sign was 666, JK. Andrew Risk says, "Peace of Christ, Mr. Minton. I missed the first 42 minutes of the stream. I will be sure to watch them after the conclusion of the stream." Yeah, I noticed we didn't have as many people here as we usually do. But yeah, you can go back and watch it when it's done. Thank you, Jesus asks, any chance the mark could be Cain being a Neanderthal? Well, what I think that would be like just as racist as the black skin option. I mean, certainly God, God is omnipotent. He can do anything he likes. He can turn a person into a Neanderthal or a chicken if he wants to. I mean, anything logically possible. But I like I said, I don't know if you saw the live stream on Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, but I'm kind of tracking with William Lane Craig that Adam and Eve might have been members of the species Homo heidelbergensis. Now, I know that sounds weird. I know that you're like, what? They're not Homo sapiens like we are? But in episode 100 of the Cerebral Faith podcast, I had William Lane Craig on, and I asked him about some of the things about his theory. And he said that there is evidence that Homo heidelbergensis in the archaeological record, like they built tools that were just as sophisticated as like a spear that is just as sophisticated as a modern Olympic javelin. And they had like cave art. They buried their dead. They probably were religious. They were just they were not irrational brutes like we are led to believe, like the cartoons. And neither were Neanderthals, because we have similar evidence for the Neanderthal. They had the same kind of cognitive faculties that Homo sapiens have. And I've been listening to Craig. I listened to some of what William Lane Craig said on my podcast, and some of what he said on his own podcast on Reasonable Faith. Whenever Kevin Harris questioned Dr. Craig about some stuff in his book, and some of the stuff he says about the theory, I'm tracking with him so far. Now, as far as exegesis goes, I kind of I don't know where how William Lane Craig is going to deal with the biblical text. I know that he's not a big fan of John Walton, so he probably is not going to go with the archetypal origins, priests and priestess in the Garden of Eden thing, like what I defended in my live stream on Genesis 2 and Genesis 3. But as far as relating the biblical history with the paleontological history, I'm kind of tracking with him there. One of the things that he said that I liked was that Homo heidelbergensis probably lived in that there's evidence that they lived in the Middle East. And I'm trying to do two things at once here. I'm not very good at that. And so that, if he's a rational, intelligent person, and he's in the Middle East, which is where scholars disagree on where the Garden of Eden was, but they all agree that it was somewhere in the Middle East, because when you read the account of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2, there are identifiable rivers. There's the Tigris, there's the Pishon, the Gihon, I forgot the fourth one. So yeah, these are identifiable rivers, and they're not in Africa, but science tells us that Homo sapiens originated in Africa. So how do you get Adam from Africa to somewhere in the general area? Well, maybe we're making a wrong presupposition that Adam was a Homo sapien. If Adam was Homo heidelbergensis, then he very well could have been there. And this is what Craig says, the summary of his book. Was Adam a real historical person? If so, who was he and when did he live? William Lane Craig sets out to answer these questions through a biblical and scientific investigation. He begins with an inquiry into the genre of Genesis 1 to 11, determining that it can most plausibly be classified as mytho-history, a narrative with both literary and historical value. He then moves into the New Testament, where he examines references to Adam in the words of Jesus and the writings of Paul, ultimately concluding that the entire Bible considers Adam the historical progenitor of the human race, a position that must therefore be accepted as a premise for Christians who take seriously the inspired truth of Scripture. Working from that foundation of biblical truth, Craig embarks upon the interdisciplinary survey of scientific evidence to determine where Adam could most plausibly be located in the evolutionary history of humankind, ultimately determining that Adam lived between 750,000 and 1 million years ago as a member of the archaic human species Homo heidelbergensis. He concludes by reflecting theologically on his findings and asking what all this might mean for us as human beings created in the image of God, literally descended from a common ancestor, albeit one who lived in the remote past. So some of the, just some of the things that has, made me think, there might be something to this, is all of the evidence that Homo heidelbergensis were rational, intelligent, free will agents. And these are prerequisites to imaging God, to bearing God's image, representing him to the rest of creation. And I just find it very hard to believe that God would wait thousands and thousands and thousands of years having these intelligent, rational, free will, moral agents walking around. But he waits thousands and thousands of years before he finally says, okay, I'm ready to reveal myself. I'm ready to reveal myself to humankind. After all these generations of people. I mean, if you've got rationality, free will, a moral compass, if you've got those cognitive faculties present, imaging, and that I am using that correctly, it's a verb, imaging God is ready to get underway. Why would God wait another 50,000 or 100,000 or 200,000 years before he finally decides to make the Adamic covenant? Second reason I like this hypothesis is that it gets Adam in the right place, the Middle East. Unlike the out of Africa model, in which you've got the Homo sapiens in Africa, not even in anywhere close to the general area where the Garden of Eden probably was. And thirdly is that it engrafts Neanderthals into the human race. Like William Lane Craig, because of these cognitive faculties, I'm not ready to write them out of the human race. Those were his words. I recommend that you go listen to the Cerebral Faith podcast, episode 100. It's here on YouTube. It's also available on wherever the podcast can be listened to audibly, whether that be Stitcher, cerebralfaith.net, Podbean, Anchor, iTunes. So anyway, if Adam and Eve were Homo heidelbergensis, because evolution doesn't happen on a large scale within a single generation, and the text clearly has Cain and Abel as Adam and Eve's immediate descendants, like son and father, mother and son, father and son and mother and son. If Adam was Homo heidelbergensis, Cain and Abel probably were too. Now, I don't know about Noah. I don't know about Nimrod. I'm not sure how, and I'm going to get to this when I get to the genealogies. The genealogies are not to be taken strictly literally. The Hebrews loved to play with numbers for symbolic purposes, kind of like the potheads do on April 20th. So anyway, I don't think the Neanderthal option is, well, I mean, for one reason is that Neanderthals were probably humans too. They just were shaped differently. But another reason is that Neanderthals probably hadn't evolved yet. I would have to Google that to see when Neanderthals came about. But if Cain were that, assuming Craig is right and Cain were that far back, that would just, of course, I suppose Cain and his descendants could leave no lineage of fossil, right? I don't know. I just don't think it's a good option. Maybe Mark was turning Cain into a ginger since gingers don't have souls. Oh, that meme from South Park. You're welcome. I'm glad to be of service. I'm going to go turn my air conditioner on because it's really hot in here. I live in South Carolina, and it's May, and even at night, it gets stuffy inside. It's just very hot and humid down here. There we go. I hope that's not too loud on the stream. So, if anyone has any more questions, just leave it in the live chat. By the way, I pre-ordered Craig's book last night, actually, on Kindle. It's not going to charge me until it comes out, thankfully. But yeah, I'm really interested in reading it because just based on what he has said in audio about the Homo heidelbergensis theory, when I first heard of it, when I was like, what? But then as I kept listening, and I gave some of the, he gave some of the reasons that I gave here on the stream. I started thinking, yeah, and you know what? That's not quite as weird as I thought, and it actually solves some issues that I've had with the ancient Adam view. The problem with the ancient Adam view is that it wasn't ancient enough. Andrew Risk says, I have no questions other than the ones I pester you with bi-weekly. Yeah, you don't pester me. I'm happy to receive your questions. I've received your most recent one. It's going to go up on the website on actually tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout for that. See, what was that? Oh yeah, the different methods, different apologetic methods, and why there aren't more. Yeah, that one's going to be going up tomorrow on the site, so you can go read that. And by the way, anybody else listening to the stream, what we're talking about here is over on my blog on cerebralfaith.net. I have a sort of like a question of the week thing, like William Lane Craig has on his website, except I can get to pretty much all of them because I'm not the number one influential philosopher in the world. And you can send me your questions about, anything apologetics or theology related, and I will write a blog post response. And I'm not gonna expose your identity. I might show your first name at most, and that's not gonna do anything because there's probably a whole bunch of other people with your first name. But over on the blog, and that's pretty much all I do on the blog now is just Q&A articles and podcast episodes. Mostly because I just can't think of anything new to write about. But I think of something every now and then. But I'm trying to focus most of my energy on the YouTube channel and the podcast. Yeah. Oh yeah, Houston. Yeah, Houston. That's also. Thank you, Jesus says I live in Houston. It's hot. Yeah, Houston is just as humid. So you know my pain. And I'm not you. I was born and raised here. I live. In fact, I've lived on this same street my whole life. I only live not in the same house, but I live just just a 5-minute walk from my childhood home. So I have spent my entire life not only in the same state but on the same street. And you would think I'd be used to this heat by now, but I'm not. I don't tolerate the heat very well. Andrew Risk says, to all those who are listening, I testify to his question answering ability. Thank you, Risk. Well, if nobody has any more questions, I guess I'll just go ahead and cut it off. Otherwise, I'll just be sitting here silently staring into the webcam and making this video's timestamp be longer than it needs to be. You're welcome. Come back next week. When we talk about Genesis 5, it's gonna be about the genealogies. Now that I know that sounds really boring, but it won't be. It's actually far more fascinating than what it first appears to be. And then after that, I'm really excited about the week after that. Then the week after that, we're going to be getting into Genesis 6. But before we get to the flood, we're going to be spending time on the Nephilim. What are the Nephilim, the sons of God, coming into the daughters of men and bearing children to them? Are they are they quasi-divine beings? You know, the result of angels and humans mating together? Are they Neanderthals? Are they, are they the result of intermingling between Cain's line and Seth's line? Are they the sons of ancient divinized kings? That's going to be a really interesting one. So and that's going to be the one after next week's. So you're going to want to tune in for that. Well, thank you for listening. I almost said listening to the Cerebral Faith podcast. Well, this is kind of like a podcast. Thank you for watching Cerebral Faith Live. If you want to support this ministry financially, go to patreon.com/cerebralfaith. Peace out. God bless. And I will see you next time. And keep using the brains that God gave you.